Hello, lovely viewers. You are most welcome to our channel Poetry Online. In this video, we shall be discussing the detailed analysis of I Will Pronounce Your Name by Leopold Sedar Signal. Kindly subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to get updates on all our new videos. Once again, let us assure you of a very interesting discussion. Get ready for this lesson. Leopold Sedar Signal was born in 1906 in Joal of the Serere tribe in Senegal. He was the first African to attend Sorbonne University in France and later became a teacher there. He was a distinguished scholar, politician, philosopher, culture enthusiast, and poet. At his country's independence in 1960, he became Senegal's first president, a position he occupied until 1980 when he voluntarily gave up power. He died in 2001 at the age of 95. I Will Pronounce Your Name was published in a collection of poems Chants d'Ombre, which means Songs from the Shadow. This poem is an example of Negritudian poem. Negritude was an ideology which aimed, among other things, to react against the cultural deprivation and Western cultural decadence that the black people experienced at the time the blacks went to Europe to study. Negritudian poems sought to revive through literature the cultural values and identity of the African continent and to praise the ancestral glories and beauty of Africa through the renunciation of whatever is Western. The ideology sought to emphasize on the value of the civilization of the African world and the contribution of the black race to human civilization. Negritudian poems focuses on three main themes, which are the celebration of the dead ancestors of Africa, the celebration of black beauty, and the spirit of reconciliation. They equally criticize the Western civilization and its attendant effects on the African continent. This group of poets discusses the nostalgia for the past or the good old days. They glorify Africa and have a firm belief in the future of the African continent. I Will Pronounce Your Name opens with an apostrophe but uses imagery, personification, and praise words extensively to carry its message. The female character who is seen as an object of love, admiration, and adoration is called Naett. Naett is a princess of Elisa with overwhelming potentials who suffers the tragic fate of being banished from her own land. Our poetic speaker, Leopold Sedar Signal, personifies the African continent as an African woman and, for that matter, an African princess. She is called Naett and then proceeds to paint a perfect picture of the African continent using the royalty, beauty, and undeniable characteristics of Naett to describe the African continent. This poem talks about the beauty of the African continent and culture, as well as the joy derived from being African and the pride in blackness. I Will Pronounce Your Name is, by all standards, a praise poem which celebrates and glorifies the beauty of the African continent using the beauty of an African princess called Naett. Throughout the poem, our poetic speaker seems obsessed with Naett and all that she has to offer. The speaker repeatedly makes reference to her adorable qualities and characteristics. One thing that is worth noting is that our poetic speaker did not directly mention the African continent in his poem. However, he makes a symbolic reference to the African continent through his choice of words. He uses words which are closely associated with the African continent and mostly used in describing the features of the African continent. These words include savanna, midday sun, heat of the day, and the shining of coal to make reference to the African continent. Hence, the center of attention is on the African continent and not the woman and not Naett. However, the African continent was specified in Naett by giving Africa human attributes. Therefore, Naett in this poem represents the African continent and all the continent has to offer to human civilization. I Will Pronounce Your Name is a free verse and has no specific rhyme scheme. The poem has 10 lines of an equal length. Let's now take a detailed analysis of the lines contained in the poem. I will pronounce your name, Naett. I will declaim you, Naett. Let's start our analysis with the meaning of the word declaim. The word declaim means to utter or deliver words in a rhetorical manner or impassioned way, as if to an audience. Some dictionaries define declaim as to speak boastfully of someone, or to speak of someone in a boastful way. Dictionary.com defines declaim as to speak aloud in an oratorical manner or make a formal speech about someone or something. The poet opens his poem, I will pronounce your name, with the speaker vowing to declaim Naett. How does he intend to do so? Our poetic speaker, in the opening lines, emphatically expresses his readiness to immortalize Naett through his poems. This poem stresses on the immortality of art and literature and the beauty of literature. This poem, I will pronounce your name, is studied by students all over the world. Hence, Naett, or the African continent, has been immortalized by the poet. Even after the death of the poet, this poem, I will pronounce your name, is still studied and loved by many. Pronounce in this poem means to glorify or praise someone or something, and not necessarily to speak or mention. Naett, your name is mild, like cinnamon. It is the fragrance in which the lemon grove sleeps. Here, our poetic speaker is presented as an obsessed lover of Naett, or the African continent, who gives a beautiful description of the African continent. The speaker in these lines likens Naett to some natural features of the African continent. He compares her to cinnamon. A cinnamon is an aromatic spice and fragrance. This comparison alone shows a strong love for the African continent, despite the various rejection, discrimination, and prejudices the continent has received from the outside world. The poet does not only praise the African continent in this poem, he equally draws the world's attention to the African woman. This poem rejects the outside world's standards of beauty, as they measure beauty in terms of the white woman alone, and not that of the black woman. Naett, your name is the sugared clarity of blooming coffee trees, and it resembles the savanna that blossom forth under the masculine orders of the midday sun. The word arduous means extremely difficult and involving a lot of effort. Here, the words we find are not as attractive as the ones in the previous lines. Our poetic speaker deliberately uses derogatory words and unattractive words to describe the African continent in a positive way. What this simply means is that our poetic speaker does not consider the perception of the world about Africa as important. Whatever the world has to say about Africa is not so much as important to him, and that cannot demean the African continent in any way or take away her underlying natural and blemished beauty, glory, and values. The description in these lines brings to mind the beautiful vegetative cover of the African continent, which is the savanna, and he compares Naett to this beautiful and natural vegetative cover. We find something interesting in this line. Our poetic speaker uses one of the things the outside world considers bad about the African continent to praise the African continent or to describe the African continent in a beautiful or nice way. He uses something bad about Africa to paint a beautiful picture of the African continent through the woman called Naett. The midday sun, no matter how hot the outside world considers it is not at all a bad thing. This midday sun, we are told, helps the coffee trees and savanna to blossom. Hence, what the outside world considers about the African continent is not so much of a bother to our poetic speaker, as he uses the bad things the outside world uses against the African continent to accentuate the beauty of the African continent. Name of dew, fresher than shadows of tamarind, fresher than even the short dusk when the heat of the day is silenced. Dew refers to the small drops of water that forms on the ground at night. Tamarind is an African tree on which small soft fruits with sticky brown skins grow. Dusk, on the other hand, is a period of time at the end of day, just before it gets dark. Here, Naett is compared to the early morning dew. Not only that, he equally admits that even though the shadow of the tamarind tree is fresh, Naett is fresher than that. Our poetic speaker did not stop there. He went on to tell us that Naett is even fresher than the short dusk. Let's try to imagine the coolness of the morning dew, the freshness of the shadow of the tamarind tree, and the lovely atmosphere at dusk. Beautiful, isn't it? Yet, our poetic speaker places Naett on the pedestal higher than all these beautiful scenes he has mentioned. What this simply means is that Naett is not only an object of beauty and admiration, she is also a symbol of power and aspiration. The next lines reveals it all. Naett, that is the dry tornado, the hard clap of lightning. Naett, coin of gold, shining coal, you are my night, my sun. A tornado is a very strong wind that spins in circle and forms a funnel from the sky to the ground. They usually cause severe damage on the ground. A coal is a hard black substance consisting mainly of carbon that is dug from the ground and burned as fuel. As we said earlier, Naett is not only an object of admiration and beauty, she is also a symbol of power and admiration. Some commentators describe these lines as a negative part of Africa. However, the poet uses some of the things the outside world considers negative about the African continent to paint a perfect picture about the African continent through the beauty of Naett. Through a careful selected choice of words, our poetic speaker presents Naett as one who invokes strong power, a power that is likened to that of a tornado. Naett is also a symbol of inspiration and aspiration, as she inspires the poet to confess his love for her. And by so doing, our poetic speaker is indirectly praising and confessing his love for blackness and everything African, something the Western literature is silent about or has a negative perception about. However, our poetic speaker uses his poem to praise Africa and puts Africa in a high pedestal. He equally compares Naett to a coin of gold and shining coal. This presents Naett as a person with great potentials, and by so doing, the African continent is one with great potentials. We all know the value of gold and the uses of coal. Therefore, the African continent is one that has a lot of potentials and a lot to offer to the human civilization. I am your hero, and now I have become your sorcerer in order to pronounce your name, Princess of Elisa, banished from Futa on the fateful day. In the concluding part of the poem, we see what the speaker's love for Africa has done to him. His undeniable love transforms him to a sorcerer. A sorcerer is someone who performs magic, practices enchantments, and conjures spells. This line reveals the power of the African continent and how it inspires her citizens. Our poetic speaker considers himself as a hero and a sorcerer, all thanks to the African continent. He calls Naett with a different name. Naett is the princess of Elisa, who was banished from Futa on that fateful day. Futa is a West African kingdom and had its capital in Futa Jalong. The impression created by the speaker about Naett is that of a superhuman who is worthy of the praise, adoration, and the love she receives from her obsessed lover. The name Naett runs throughout the poem, as if the speaker cannot talk without mentioning it. This goes to explain the speaker's obsession and deep love for the African continent. Africa is presented as a continent that has so much to offer to the world. Naett met a tragic fate of being banished from her own land. Some of the natural resources the poet mentions ranges from the vegetation to mineral resources. Talk about cinnamon, lemon, mangrove, coffee, savanna, gold, and coal. Not only does the continent have a fair share of natural resources, they equally have a fair share of all manner of skilled personnel, including the poet Leopold Sedar Senghor. As he considers himself as a hero and a sorcerer who will pronounce Naett's name to the rest of the world, he is not only praising her, but also putting her on a high pedestal. The poet concludes his poem by telling us that he is a poet and he will use his poems to praise and glorify the African continent, thereby immortalizing the African continent and beauty. This poem glorifies the African continent and accentuates the pride in being black and the pride in blackness. Thanks for watching this video. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video.